You pray, but nothing happens. No peace, no grace, no change. Padre Pio warned, "The devil is not afraid of words. He fears hearts that burn." Some prayers open heaven, others leave you exposed, and the enemy knows the difference. At the end, you'll pray a short correction. Don't skip it. The most common and most dangerous mistake in the spiritual life is not forgetting to pray, but praying in a way that is empty, distracted, and disconnected from the soul. Padre Pio warned that the devil does not fear such prayers. In fact, he welcomes them. When a person prays with their lips while their heart is elsewhere, they engage in a kind of spiritual sleepwalking. The words may be sacred, the formulas correct, the gestures precise, but if the interior is cold or inattentive, the prayer becomes hollow. Padre Pio saw this in many of the faithful. People who recited the rosary every day, who attended Mass, who said novenas, and yet experienced no transformation, no fire, no intimacy with God. Why? Because their prayers remained on the surface. The devil's strategy is subtle. He knows he cannot always stop a believer from praying, so he encourages distraction instead. He tempts the mind to wander, the heart to close, the soul to treat prayer as obligation rather than encounter. A distracted prayer may seem harmless, but over time it forms a dangerous habit. The habit of appearing faithful while losing spiritual sensitivity. The person continues the motions but grows increasingly numb. They pray but feel no presence. They speak but hear no answer. And eventually, they begin to believe that prayer itself is powerless. This is precisely what the enemy desires. Not to stop the prayer, but to empty it of power until the believer walks away in quiet despair. Padre Pio understood that this kind of lifeless prayer does more damage than silence. It deceives the soul into thinking it is doing something holy, when in reality it is drifting further from the living God. The enemy does not fear words. He fears love. He fears surrender. He fears a heart that prays from the depths, even if the words are few or broken. But a prayer said out of pride, routine, or impatience, these have no weight in the spiritual world. The saints and angels do not move at the sound of a rushed Hail Mary spoken with a divided mind. Heaven responds to the cry of the heart, not the rhythm of the tongue. This mistake is especially common in the modern world. People are rushed, overloaded with noise, and conditioned to multitask. Prayer becomes just another task, something to check off before sleep or fit in between appointments. Many pray while scrolling their phone, watching TV, or worrying about work. The mouth says the rosary, but the mind is shopping or scrolling or arguing silently with someone. These moments are not neutral. They are spiritually dangerous because they train the soul to tolerate divided attention in the presence of God. And when God is treated as background noise, the soul begins to wither. Padre Pio's spiritual insight was clear. It is better to say one prayer with attention than 100 without. It is better to pause and breathe before prayer than to recite it in haste. The devil laughs when a believer thinks quantity matters more than sincerity. He loves when people mumble novenas without a thought, when they race through the rosary like a stopwatch, when they confuse repetition with devotion. These patterns may feel religious, but they carry no spiritual weight if the soul is absent. It is not the action that matters most. It is the presence within the action. This is the great deception, to appear devout but remain unchanged. The devil does not tremble when we pray from habit. He trembles when we pray from love, from desperation, from truth. Lifeless prayer is like swinging a sword made of paper. It makes movement, but it cuts nothing. Padre Pio called the rosary a weapon. but only in the hands of those who truly mean it. When prayer becomes mechanical, it loses its edge. When it becomes a ritual without heart, it becomes a performance, not a battle. And the enemy knows it. The faithful must recognize this mistake and confront it directly. Prayer is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be honest. A distracted, wandering prayer is still redeemable if the soul calls itself back. But a cold, routine prayer that continues unchallenged becomes a pathway to spiritual dryness and eventually spiritual death. Padre Pio's warning is clear. The devil is not threatened by prayer that has no fire. He laughs at it. And if the EIA's faithful do not return to the heart of prayer, they risk becoming religious in form, but empty in spirit. And that is when the soul becomes vulnerable. This happens because prayer, by its very nature, is not a performance or a formula. It is a living act of relationship between the soul and God. And like any relationship, its strength depends on presence, attention, and sincerity. In modern life, however, believers are often taught to value results and efficiency above stillness and depth. As a result, many approach prayer as a task to be completed, rather than a space to be entered. They recite words without intention, repeat prayers without reflection, and expect grace to flow simply because the correct phrases were used. But heaven does not respond to robotic utterances. Heaven responds to the cry of the heart. Padre Pio understood this deeply. That is why he always called for interior recollection before beginning any prayer, no matter how familiar. He knew that the soul must be awake in order for prayer to reach God. The reason so many people fall into distracted, lifeless prayer is because the world around them is constantly pulling them in every direction. Minds are fragmented. Hearts are overwhelmed. Silence feels uncomfortable, and stillness is rare. When the soul is not trained to rest, to listen, or to open itself with reverence, prayer becomes mechanical by default. People bring the noise of the world into the presence of God, and rather than quieting themselves, they attempt to pray over the noise. But true prayer requires stillness, not always external, but always internal. The presence of God does not descend into chaos. It waits for space, for invitation, for sincerity. There is also a deeper cause, the loss of understanding that prayer is sacred. In many homes, prayer is rushed. Children are taught to memorize words, but not to encounter God. Adults feel guilty if they don't say their prayers, so they race through them half awake, just to avoid feeling negligent. But guilt is not the right fuel for prayer. Love is. And where love is absent, prayer becomes hollow. Padre Pio often warned that spiritual habits without spiritual awareness become traps. They make the soul believe it is protected while it drifts, further from the source of grace. He saw that people could go years saying the same prayers daily, and yet remain unchanged in spirit, bound by the same sins, afflicted by the same darkness. Why? Because they had lost the inner awareness of what they were doing. Another reason this happens is because many people carry wounds and distractions they've never brought into the light. When they begin to pray, their thoughts are immediately invaded by fears, memories, or temptations. Instead of pausing and inviting God into that brokenness, they try to ignore it, rushing through the prayer as if it can cover the pain. But unhealed wounds make prayer difficult. They block attention. They generate resistance. And when prayer becomes something the soul wants to escape rather than embrace, it becomes lifeless. Padre Pio knew that true prayer requires vulnerability. It means bringing everything, the good, the broken, the hidden, into the presence of God and letting Him speak into it. There is also the subtle influence of pride. Some believe that because they are consistent in prayer, they are spiritually safe. But consistency without humility is a deception. The devil does not fear consistency if it is hollow. He fears dependence. When someone prays because they know they need God, not because they want to feel righteous, that prayer carries weight. But when prayer becomes a badge of identity or a routine of self-righteousness, it loses its spiritual impact. Padre Pio taught that the saints never saw prayer as proof of their holiness. They saw it as the cry of their poverty. Finally, this happens because many people were never taught how to pray from the heart. They were given words, devotions, and instructions, but not formation. They were told what to say, but not how to mean it. They were shown how to kneel, but not how to open their souls. The Church has many treasures: rosaries, novenas, litanies, hours of adoration, but none of them will bear fruit unless the soul is engaged. The form must serve the relationship. Without that, even the most beautiful prayers become dry. Padre Pio said that one sigh of love is worth more than 1,000 mechanical recitations, not because the words lack value, but because God desires the heart. This is why so many prayers today feel weak and ineffective. Not because God is distant, but because the soul is distracted, closed, or simply repeating what it has never made its own. Prayer without presence is like a song without music. The reedy notes are there, but the soul is missing. And the devil, knowing this, encourages it. He would rather the faithful be distracted in prayer than not pray at all, because a distracted soul is easier to confuse. Padre Pio's warning is a call back to real prayer. Prayer that begins with awareness, continues in surrender, and ends in communion. Anything less may be heard, but it will not change us. And that, in the end, is what the devil wants. A church that prays without power, a people who speak to heaven but never listen. To restore power to prayer, Padre Pio taught 3 essential disciplines: intention, attention, and humility. Before beginning any prayer, the believer must stop and set the heart. This takes only seconds, but it changes everything. A brief pause with the simple interior act of saying, "Lord, I want to mean this," aligns the soul with heaven. Without intention, the prayer becomes empty sound. This is not emotionalism or performance. It is clarity of focus. The person must know why they are praying and to whom they are speaking. Otherwise, the words fall flat, and the connection remains unopened. Attention must follow. The mind naturally wanders, but attention is a discipline, not a gift. It must be trained. Padre Pio would recommend short, focused prayers rather than long, distracted ones. If a person can only pray one Hail Mary with full attention, that has more weight than 5 decades said in a state of mental absence. The key is not the number of words, but the presence of the soul. A person who is truly present, even in silence, prays more powerfully than one who recites pages without awareness. Every word should be chosen carefully, even if memorized. The believer must be conscious of what is being said and to whom it is directed. Humility is the final and most critical element. Padre Pio insisted that prayer without humility is useless. The soul must approach God knowing its need, not with pride, not with entitlement, but with surrender. If there is sin, it must be acknowledged. If there is weakness, it must be offered. Real prayer begins when the person stops pretending. There is no need to feel spiritual or inspired. What matters is truth. Lord, I am tired, but I am here. That is a prayer. God does not ask for perfect feelings. He asks for real presence. Humility means not hiding the inner state, but bringing it into the light and offering it as it is. Practically, this means preparing a space that supports attention. A quiet corner, a crucifix, a candle. Physical surroundings help the soul settle. Distractions must be minimized. Phones silenced. Movement stilled. Even 2 minutes of silent recollection before prayer can shift the entire spiritual posture. The body should mirror the soul. Upright, still, reverent. The habit of rushing through prayers must be broken. Better to say less with fire than more with coldness. When dryness comes, as it often does, the solution is not to quit, but to persist with awareness. The words should not be thrown away in frustration, but repeated slowly, even silently, with focus. If nothing is felt, nothing is lost, because the aim is not emotion, but offering. Padre Pio said that the most pleasing prayers to God are often those said with no consolation at all. They prove love, not just habit. The faithful must remember that prayer is not for God's benefit, but for theirs. He already knows their needs. The act of prayer changes the soul, not God. It opens, purifies, and orders the heart. But it only works if it is real. Real means intentional, focused, and humble. Anything else may sound like prayer, but it lacks the substance to reach heaven. Or resist the enemy. Don't just repeat words. Return to truth. If your prayer has no fire, it's time to start again. Pray this now. Lord, forgive my hollow prayers. Set my heart on fire. Let the enemy tremble, not at my voice, but because I belong to you. The devil laughs at empty prayers, but not at this one.